Well, welcome. We're so glad to see all of you. Come on in, and we're going to have a very special time here today. One thing I know for sure is those of you that are joining us on this special Wealth Builders webinar are interested in vacation rentals, which we're really passionate about as well. And we're just really excited to have you join. I really think about vacation rentals and equate that to hospitality. And so many of the people that I've talked to, I know most of you probably that are joining us, we have conversations about that we can create a beautiful environment in these vacation rentals that really ministers to people, provides a glimpse into God's presence for people. And then in that, there's so many steps that we need to practically follow to make sure that we are staying on that course of good stewardship, following the guidelines, and that with our Wealth Builders family, we know that's a biblical foundation with the actual how-tos. And so today, we've got Bill Bronchick that is joining us, and I'm going to have him say hi here. I saw him wave.
Hi, good morning, everybody.
And the topic that he's going to be covering is so clever. It's how to avoid long-term problems with your short-term rentals. So we're going to go over some of those legal things. But in the meantime, before we get started, I would love for you just to come on in and put in the chat where you are tuning in from so that we can give you a shout out. We know many of your names. I'm sure a lot of our coaching family is on as well, but we just like to know who you are and where you're tuning in from. So I'll just watch for those. I don't see any yet. It takes a moment, and once they start to pop in, we'll be greeting you for sure. Also, the format of this is we're going to be giving you a presentation, 30 to 40 minutes, and we'll leave time for questions. Here we go. We've got Juliana coming in from Florida. Hello. Rob's joining us from Michigan. Oh, it's going. I love this. Deb is from Arizona. Sue, hello from San Antonio. We just saw you. Ora Meyer, welcome. Jennifer coming in from Florida as well. Heather from Colorado, Chipeta Park, which is a really great area for vacation rentals. Lisa, thanks for joining us from Fort Wayne. We've got Fran coming in from Illinois. And as you go, just let me know so we can see your names as we go along. And when you do have a question for Bill to answer, go ahead and enter that in the chat section as well, and we'll answer as many of those questions as possible. So with that, Bill, we're really excited. Oh, there's Yuda. Hello, Yuda. So with that, Bill, I'm going to turn it over to you as we talk about long-term problems with short-term rentals.
Great. Thanks, Karen. And thank you all, the Wealth Builders family and friends, for joining us. And a special thanks to the people behind the scenes,
Yeah.
like Gabriella and Zoe,
Zoe.
all the people who make this smooth as possible. Smooth as possible, because I'm all thumbs when it comes to this stuff, the technology and all, making sure it goes well. So everybody, welcome, and I'm glad to see we have people from all over the country joining us. And let's share my PowerPoint screen and we can get started on today's topic, which is long-term legal issues with short-term rental properties. And Karen called them vacation rentals, but not all short-term rentals are vacation. So I'm just going to refer to them as short-term rentals, or STRs. It's easier on the PowerPoint slides to use the expression STR, short-term rental, and that could be anything from a night or two to up to a month or more in terms of short-term rental. But most people who do the short-term rentals do them in vacation areas, and those seem to be the most popular and the most profitable. Looking at the short-term rental business opportunity for solo ventures, this is according to Airbnb, a single property generates an average of $45,000 in revenue a year. That's a pretty big poke, for a single family, or maybe even a condo. Companies managing 2 to 5 properties average 134,000 in revenue, and those with 5 to 25 see revenues of 300,000 or more. That is a long way away from single family rentals, which, you're lucky if you can get a couple of thousand a month, in a property, which is, double or more than renting long term. Now, of course, it's not without its risks, pitfalls, and work, and downside and so forth. So I don't want to scare you away from, if you're not in the business yet, from doing it, but I want to open your eyes to what's going on, because in any new business there are risks, and there's what you know about your business and what you don't know, and then the scary part, what you don't know that you don't know. And that's what I really want to focus on here. I want to focus on opening your eyes to, I never even thought of that. It's in the area of what I don't know, the blind spot. And that way you can, figure out more of that into the don't know. Some of it you'll learn today is from what you don't know to what you do know. So you're aware of there's an issue and you're going to learn something new. Okay. So we want to get rid of especially that third category, which you don't know that you don't know. CYA, by the way, does not mean call your attorney. So most of you know what CYE means. First of all, don't wing it. A lot of people think that Airbnb or VRBO or the short-term rental, vacation rental business, what do you want to call it, is something really easy and fun. It is fun, but it's not as easy as you think. It's not a DIY thing. You need to learn. You need to get informed of what you don't know that you don't know, and you need to get professional help. Now, some of you have been in the business for a while. You're probably already looking for professional help, and that was a joke. Because it could be a handful if you don't run and scale your business properly. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. So this is what we're going to cover today in some of the legal issues that revolve around short-term rentals. So number one, licensing issues. Now that's in the don't know category. A lot of you know that you need a license to operate an Airbnb or VRBO or short-term rental in your area. But it varies widely from area to area. So we'll talk about that. Zoning and legal regulations. Some of you may be aware or not aware there might be zoning and legal regulations and restrictions on doing short-term rentals in your area. Taxes, lots of tax issues here. Lodging tax, property tax, income tax, and how the rental income from your business is treated. Safety, liability issues, and insurance. That's a biggie. Advertising. This is going to open up some new things you might not have really thought about in advertising on the various websites. And there's at least, besides Airbnb and VRBO, there's at least 50 websites out there that advertise short-term rentals. And then I have the miscellaneous issues like they do on Jeopardy, the potpourri. The potpourri. So let's get started and talk about the licensing issues, because that's the big one that people are at least aware that it exists and how to deal with that. You got to know your state and local. So you're probably got state regulations that are broad, and then your locality, whether it be a village, a city, a county, or other local jurisdiction that may have additional or further or different regulations. So in a lot of states, the state law just says the localities can regulate it, and they leave it up to the localities to do it, or the counties to do it, or the cities or so forth to do it. And in other states, there are state regulations plus additional local regulations. For example, is an STR, short-term rental, is it defined as less than 30 days or less than 2 months, 3 months? So for example, in most jurisdictions, the short-term rental is defined as renting to someone for less than 30 days, okay, at a time. Now, you go into other places like Pompano Beach, Florida, it's in Karen's neck of the wood. 6 months is considered short-term, anything less than 6 months. So you can't just get around it by saying, well, I'll rent it for 30 or 35 days at a time. Sometimes we call those intermediate rentals, not necessarily short. And then you have places like where I am in Colorado where they haven't defined what short-term means. I got into a dispute with a client, and the Colorado regulatory people, and they said that my client needed a broker's license to operate, short-term rental. I said, well, the problem is you haven't defined short-term rental, because he was renting properties, for 2 to 3 months instead of 12 months, and they were arguing anything more than 30 days requires a broker's license, because in Colorado you need a broker's license to be a property manager for others, but not for short term. But they didn't define short term at the state level. That was the problem. So it is in flux now, and there are ambiguities. So we have to do our best to learn the rules, learn what you can do, what you can't do, and then, wrangle around some of the gray areas the best that we can, and using professional help to wrangle around those rules. Can you rent units that you don't live in? So, for example, in the city of Denver, where my office is, actually, my office is outside the city of Denver, but in the metro area. But in the city of Denver itself proper, you're not allowed to buy a property and make it a full-time short-term rental thing. You can only rent your own residence out, either by the room or the whole thing while you're not there. You can't buy properties that are just full-time short-term rentals. You can't do that. And in other jurisdictions, you can do that. And then other jurisdictions, there's designated areas or zones. So if it's considered like a vacation area, so for example, in Colorado, up in the mountains, the ski areas, they're pretty liberal with the short-term rentals, where in the city of Denver, they're not so liberal about it. And I'll explain why in a little bit, what the government's concern is and why they want to regulate these things and make rules. Some areas limit the total number of rental days per year. So you can rent it less than 30 days, but only a total number of maybe 90 days a year. So you need to know both the state and the local regulations and how you can wrangle around those. And how does it apply? For example, some of them, if you have more than a certain number of units that you own, then other regulations apply. But who owns the units? Is it just you? Is it your LLC? Do you have separate companies? And does that apply to commonly owned separate entities? I'll give you the lawyer answer. It depends. It really depends on how the law is written. And there's also some number of people per bedroom restrictions. So if you have a 1 or 2 bedroom, can you rent it to 8 people? And the local jurisdiction or the state jurisdiction may say, no, only X amount of people per bedroom, even though you might throw a couch bed in the living room. So you have to be aware of some of these restrictions. Getting your license and or permit. I say and or, you may need both. Some areas require a license for every landlord and a permit for each property. So if you have 2, you need a business license to operate and then a permit for each house. In other jurisdictions, you need a license or a permit or both for each property. And if you have different LLCs, like say owning one property versus another LLC owning another property, there might be different rules for that depending on your jurisdiction. Are they transferable? This is a big thing. Are they transferable if you sell the property? Does the license go with the property, or does the new owner have to apply for a brand new license? And maybe that might be in a jurisdiction. For example, those of you who attended Charis Bible College in Woodland Park, they put a moratorium on new licenses. So if an existing person running an Airbnb or VRBO or short-term rental decides to sell the property, can the new owner, piggyback or grandfather in that license, or are they on the waiting list? It depends on your local jurisdiction. All right. So let's say the LLC has the license and you buy someone's company, you buy the ownership of the company that owns the property. Can you wrangle around having to get a new license? In most jurisdictions I've looked, the answer is no. If the principles change substantially in the company, you need a new license or you need to assume the existing license. And operating without a license or permit can be costly. I have some examples here. In the city of Denver, $1,000 fine per violation. And that's not just, one thing like not having a license. It could be three things. In the state of Florida, the state fine is $1,000 a day, but in Miami Beach, get this, up to a $20,000 fine for violating the rules. And I mean, we're not just talking about operating without a permit. You may be violating other rules about like not collecting sales tax, which we'll talk about in a moment. So the licensing rules, I say, is probably the biggest issue you need to be concerned with when you're buying vacation or short-term rentals. You need to know in that jurisdiction how they define it, what's the maximum number of days or people you could put in there, or consecutive days rented or total days rented a year, and any other regulations that might be in that locality. Don't assume. Don't rely on the seller. Even if the seller's running it as a short-term rental, they may not know, or they may be giving you bad information. Don't rely on the broker. The broker may be giving you wrong information. I have a client right now, and she may even be on here, who bought a condo that the broker said, oh yeah, you could rent that out short term. And it turned out that the bylaws of the and the declarations of the condo association said you can't rent it out at all, short term or otherwise. Only the owner can live there. So big problem, big problem. So know the rules. Don't wing it. Don't DIY it. Get professional help in interpreting the laws, rules, regulations, and statutes. Zoning and legal regulations. Now, I'm going to throw a lot of information at you in a short period of time, I admit. And you're probably already furiously writing. Don't worry about it. You don't have to write everything I say. Just kind of pay attention and make notes like, I need to learn more about this. So on the last slide, you didn't have to write the 15 things that I said. You just have to write a note that learn the local rules for your short-term rentals in the place that you're buying or considering using an existing property as a short-term rental. Simple as that. Zoning and legal regulations. Why does our government want to regulate short-term rentals? Well, the government in many cases just can't help itself when it comes to rules, laws, and regulations. I didn't hear Trump promise any of that, getting rid of regulations, because he can't. It's a locality thing. It's not a federal thing. So why does the government want to do it? Well, the main reason is fewer long-term rentals, because when you turn a long-term rental to a short-term rental, there's fewer long-term rentals. And what that causes is less supply compared to demand and rising rents. And that's the big issue. A lot of people will say, well, it's the hotel lobby fighting against, the private owners because they don't want them to make money and they want to make the money. That's not really it. There are safety and health issues that, hotels, for example, are inspected, and in your jurisdiction, you may not have annual or monthly or whatever inspections for your short-term rental. So, that's another issue too, why they don't want to be completely unregulated business. And frankly, we as owners don't want an unregulated business. We want some regulation to make sure that the bad actors aren't ruining it for the rest of us. So, if the newspaper or the news reports or on social media, people are reporting bad experiences over and over again with short-term rentals in general, it makes it bad for the reputation of all of us, and less people will use short-term rentals. Now, you have websites like Airbnb and VRBO, which have ratings, and that keeps you honest too, because if the customer complains, and frankly, let's be honest, most people who leave reviews online are complainers. Few people who are happy leave reviews. Most people who leave reviews online on anything are complainers. I would say probably 75%, 3 to 1 complainers versus happy people. And that's just the nature of it. So we're in a hospitality business, as Karen said, we're in the retail business. We have to be careful to make sure not only we're following the laws and rules, but we're keeping our customers happy. Um, the studies show, by the way, the impact on hotels, studies have shown a minimal impact of taking away hotel business compared to overall more tourists in an area that are staying there, which brings more revenue to the city. So the city is not really against it because it hurts hotels, because they get more revenue overall, because more people overall are staying. But of course, hotels are big corporations who have big lobbies, and want to fight against us because they're competing for the customer in some cases. Can the government regulator ban short-term rentals? That's been litigated a lot. In fact, the New York Attorney General went in and just banned them all flat outright at one point. And owners have sued in various states and in federal courts and in state courts. And property owners sued the governments for what's called an illegal taking. Many of you know what a taking is. The government may not take private property without just compensation. That's in the Constitution. So by not allowing you to use it for what you want to use it, is that an illegal taking by the government? And most courts have said no, it's not. An outright ban, even in some areas, was considered fine. There's a lot of cities around the world. I mean, this isn't just in the United States. There's cities all around the world who have short-term rentals, and cities like Paris have all but banned it. Like I said, the city of Denver, unless you live there, you can't even have one. And the courts have generally ruled with the government on those things because it's a regulatory thing. It's health, it's safety, it's making sure people follow the rules in terms of collecting sales tax and lodging tax and so on and so forth. Another zoning issue here is your property zoned for commercial use or residential use? If you have a property in a suburban neighborhood that's zoned residential, the county or city may prohibit you from operating a business. Now, how do they define a short-term rental business? That's the key. And it may be, if you're renting for less than 30 days, so you're just going to have customers that stay a month or longer. Which is harder to do, and you'll make less money than if you rent it 3 or 4 days at a time, but you deal with what you have in your jurisdiction. You may be able to get what's called a variance. So if there's a zoning regulation in your area that says you can't do X, you can petition the county or the city to go in a hearing before what's called a zoning board. And you make a petition, say, I want a variance, meaning I want an exception. Especially if you've been doing it a long time and all of a sudden a government official says can't do that, and they could say, look, we've been doing this for 10 years. Can we be grandfathered in? It's not bothering anybody. And at the hearing, of course, your neighbors or anybody else has the right to testify against why they shouldn't give you a variance. So, if the reason that the government found out was you've got a bunch of noisy customers having parties and parking all over the street, your neighbors are the ones who complained, and it's not likely you're going to get that variance without a fight. And here's another one. Does your HOA, your homeowners association, allow it? Now, mostly we're talking about condos here, but a lot of covenant-controlled single-family house neighborhoods have HOAs that may restrict or outright ban short-term rentals. Most newer condominiums, older condominiums that were built, in the 70s and 80s before this was popular, probably don't have any restrictions, although they may have subsequently passed restrictions. But when you form a condominium or in a homeowners association, there are what are called covenants, conditions, and restrictions, referred to as CC&Rs. Covenants, conditions, and restrictions. And they're laid out in the initial filing of the HOA with the county, which you can get a copy of, those restrictions and those covenants. And then there's bylaws, which could be amended from time to time, or rules that could be amended from time to time by the HOA board. So I found most older HOAs don't prohibit it, but many of them have amended it to restrict it, in a reasonable, hopefully, fashion most times, sometimes unreasonably, but most of the newer ones in the last few years would ban it. At the very least, many of them ban it for the first couple of years of ownership. So if you buy a condominium that's brand new, chances are you can't rent it out, period, short or long term, for at least 2 or 3 years, because what they don't want is an HOA, it's a condo building that's 80% renters. First, it's harder on the HOA to regulate. And more importantly, it makes it harder for people to get loans against those condos. So Fannie Mae lending regulations say if the vast majority of owners in the building rent out to someone else and they don't live there, it won't qualify for financing with Fannie and Freddie, which makes it very difficult for someone to purchase. And that's understandable why they'd want to restrict that. So, and also look for loopholes. I mean, we talked about, the rules where it says you can't do this, and then where it doesn't say anything, and then where it's vague. So vague is my job. As a lawyer, we operate in vague. It's the gray area. We say, well, it doesn't exactly say this, and it doesn't exactly say you can't do that. So we'll find a gray area, and you have to take the chance that you might get regulated or fined by the HOA and may have to go to court over it. And are you willing to do that? You willing to go into that fight? Is it worth it to you? Taxes. That's everyone's favorite topic. So we have a whole bunch of tax issues here to deal with. Now, the first one is lodging tax. If you're renting properties less than 30 days in almost every jurisdiction, you need a lodging tax license, and you got to collect lodging tax, just like when you go to a hotel and they charge you tax. It's lodging tax. It's not sales tax. Now, some areas charge actually a sales tax on this, but it's the same thing. It's a lodging tax is what it is, just like hotels and motels. And which means you need to get a sales tax or lodging tax license from probably the state and the city, which means you have to collect both from your customer, and you have to report at least in most areas you can it's monthly, but some areas, if you don't do it a lot, if your total revenue and tax collected isn't a lot, you could do it quarterly. But if you're doing this full time with your property, it's probably going to be monthly. Now, what the good thing is if you use a lot of platforms like Airbnb, they do handle a lot of that, the collection of it and dealing with it, but you still have to file the reports unless you use a management company that does that all for you. And that's kind of like a case for using a manager. Property managers for short-term rentals get a pretty big fee, 20 to 30%. That's a big poke. But if they can handle the collection and the filing and the customers and the repairs and the cleaning, that might make your life a lot easier than doing it all yourself. So it is a consideration. Property taxes. Can using your property exclusively for, quote, business use require you in that jurisdiction to pay a higher property tax? So if if it's zoned a certain way and your property tax is a certain amount, and they're considering it being used as a residence, and you put it into business use, they might be able to recategorize the tax rate depending on how the local county tax code is written. So you got to look into that as well. And then the big one is income tax, which we could spend an hour and a half talking about that, but let me give you the highlights. If you rent your primary residence, meaning you rent out your own house, like in the city of Denver, 14 days or less per year, you don't even have to claim the income. It's kind of a loophole in the tax code that says So let's say you live in a house and you're gone for 2 weeks a year during Christmas time, and it's in a good house in a good area. Maybe you can make a few $1,000 renting that house out prime season. Or you own a ski house, but you might be gone a couple of weeks a year, or just randomly 14 days a year. If it's 14 days total per year or less, you don't even have to report the income. Now, you may still have to report to the state or city the lodging tax, and you may still need a license to Airbnb it or short-term rental it. But from a federal income tax standpoint, you don't even have to claim the income, which is nice. And here's the sort of gray area that has been tossed around by accountants and attorneys and short-term rental owners for years is the short-term rental income business income or rental income? Is it business income, ordinary earned income, or is it passive rental income? Because that makes a big difference on how and where you report it and what taxes you pay. Now, it really depends on the level of services you provide. Now, if you provide cleaning alone, that doesn't necessarily make it like a hotel, because hotels don't report lease income, they report business income. But hotels provide breakfast and maid service every day and new sheets and linens and towels. They're providing full service, so that's clearly business income. The more of those things that you do as a short-term business rental owner, the more it starts to look like business income. And why is that important? Well, let's say you're operating as an individual, which I don't recommend you do, meaning not an LLC or a corporation or anything, and you report your short-term rental income as rental income, which would be a Schedule E reporting. Now, on Schedule E income, which is passive, you don't pay FICA tax or self-employment tax, Social Security, Medicare, so forth. If it is determined what you're doing is business income, they're going to move it from your Schedule E to your personal return Schedule C, which is a self-employed business on which you pay both income tax and 15.3% self-employment tax, which I'm sure you want to avoid. We all want to avoid that, paying into the nanny system. And maybe someday we'll get it back when we turn 65, or older, or whatever. So if it really also depends on the service you provide, also the average length of stay of your customers too. So if you do like weeks at a time is better than days at a time, because days at a time looks more like a hotel. That's not the only factor, but the services you provide seems to be, from what I've read from the court cases, the deciding factor. Now, the way to get around that and make sure you're safe is to consider doing this. Own your properties in one or more LLCs. That depends on how many you have. So if you had 10 properties, and let's say you split that ownership up into 4 LLCs, okay? 2, 2, 2, 2, 3. And then the LLCs would then hire a management company to run it. Now, that management company happens to be a corporation that you own. That corporation will manage those properties or even master lease the properties from the LLCs and then sublet to the customers. Now, the income would be ordinary to the corporation, but that's fine. Business income to a corporation is fine. It's not good to an LLC that's passing through to you. We don't want that. We don't want to pay the FICA tax. But then the corporation, out of what it collects, pays leasing fees for the master lease of the properties to the LLC. So the LLCs that show up on your return, that income is clearly rental. But to the corporation collecting it and running the operation with the customers, it's business income, which is fine. You'll expense out many things and try to get that as close to zero as you can. I know like that's some of you got that, some of you are with me there, some of you went right over your head. That's okay. Just this is something you should discuss with your attorney and or tax advisor if you're going to do this on a scale. Okay. All right. So those are the main tax issues. There's a whole lot more things we can cover, like the real estate professional designation, whether you materially participate, you can take losses and deductions, whether you can do componentized depreciation on because you're providing furniture and things, which is personal property, whether you can depreciate those on a faster schedule than the real estate, which is a long schedule, and get bigger deductions. And that would be a topic for another day. All right, let's get into safety, liability, and insurance. Now, again, this is something we can spend hours on, but let me give you the highlights. Number one, safety issues. Most areas, and whether they're required or not, you should do this. Smoke detectors, CO2 detectors, fire extinguishers, etc. Safety issues, health issues. Make sure that's good. Make sure you've got no bugs and you've got no bed bugs and you've got no, if you're in a wildlife area, you don't have, you've got an apparatus for locking up the garbage so you don't have bears, attacking your customers. Pools and hot tubs. Check for local regulations on that. There might be regulations and rules on that you're unaware of, especially if you have a single family home and you rent it out to people. There may be regulations of you may have to have a fence, you may have to have other safety things, and so forth. It's a good idea also to have digital locks in unsafe areas and deadbolts to make sure that nobody breaks in. A lot of people think like vacation rental in a bad area. You'd be surprised. There's a decent amount of crime in vacation areas. Liability issues. Boy, we could talk forever on this, but I don't want to bore you or scare you. But let's get to the highlights. One, we have damage to the property of other units in a building or the building itself. So if you're a condo in a building and your tenant does something wrong, like, I don't know, causes something like turns off the heat or something and the hot water heater explodes, and or even due not to their fault, the hot water heater explodes and it floods your unit and it floods 2 units below you, or the tenant causes a grease fire in the kitchen and it burns your unit and 2 units next to you, or does damage to the hallway or the common areas. One of your tenants opens the door too hard and it snaps off to the main building. All those things are potential liability issues for you as the owner. Another big one, which is most of the claims with Airbnb and type properties, personal injury to customers, their guests, I didn't put that there, but add their guests and other occupants to the building. So if the customer is injured in your property, in the common area of the building, or maybe gets into a spat with a neighbor and, does something to them or their property, it's questionable whether you'd be liable. But if you had a month-long rental and you had 3 calls from 3 neighbors saying he threatened me, I'm pretty sure you'd be liable for not getting rid of the person at that point, or at least calling the police to see if it's real. Don't own short-term rentals in your name, period. I mean, that should be a given for any rental, but use corporate entities, LLCs, corporations, trusts. That's a topic for another day that we've covered before, or we may cover again in the future, and especially relative to short-term rentals. That's a discussion we can have on another day. And finally, insurance. Make sure your insurer knows what you're doing with the property. If you already own a property as a long-term rental and you decide to turn it into a short-term, you may not have coverage for certain things, or maybe even coverage at all. You may have to get a special, either a new policy or a rider to your existing policy. Your policy may say, we don't cover short-term rentals, period. Read it. Talk to your insurance broker or insurance agent. Carry plenty of liability insurance and maybe even an umbrella at least a total, I would say, of 2 million. If you've got uh, 50 people or more in and out of your properties in a year, come on. You've got to have some, especially if you've got a pool, if you're in a building that could be a fire, you've got any kind of hazard uh, to life, limb, or property, carry lots of insurance. Many claims, however, are not covered by insurance, which is another reason to use corporate entities. But things like dog bites, if you allow dogs and that dog bites the neighbor, or bed bugs, liquor liability. There are even short-term rentals advertising that we are what they call 420 friendly, which means marijuana. They not only do they allow it, they encourage it. They stuff the cabinets with Doritos, and they give you a map to all the local weed places. They do that in Colorado a lot. Now, I'm not as worried about stoned people as I am drunk people per se, but a stoned person who falls asleep in a hot tub, and you encouraged it without having them sign a liability waiver for that, could end up in some liability. Bed bugs, especially if you're aware of it. If someone complained before and you didn't do, you didn't bomb the place and, and get rid of the mattresses and get new ones, you could be liable for that. Liquor liability, meaning liquor liability is if someone holds a party and the host is liable for serving people who are inebriated and they go home and get into an accident, but you as the host may be liable, especially if you provide a bar. So be careful about that. Hot tub injuries, very common, and pool injuries as well. All right, that's all I wanted to say about safety, liability, and insurance for now. There are so many more issues. And again, I'm not trying to scare you away from this business by any means. I just want you to go in with your eyes open and get in the area of what you don't know that you don't know. Because a lot of people do this. It's like they watch TV shows. People who watch the Fixer Upper shows and they think, "Oh, that looks really fun and easy," and they go do a fix up flip and they lose $40,000. It's not as easy and fun. Remember, that stuff is edited for television, so it's not as easy as it looks. Although it can be fun, and once you get a system down and you know what you're doing and you've learned it, it could be a very lucrative and fun business for you. It really can. I'm not trying to scare you away from it and be a party pooper here. All right. And then finally, the potpourri of legal issues. I'll take potpourri for $50. One is complaints from neighbors. That's a very common thing. Loud parties, excessive parking from guests, harassing or even assaulting neighbors, dog bites. We've talked about some of these things before. So generally, the rule about dogs is certain dogs. Well, first of all, certain dogs are prohibited in your jurisdiction, possibly. Like in the city of Aurora in Colorado, they ban pit bulls. Now, people say, "Oh, I have a pit bull. She's a sweetheart." Look, 60% of dog bite fatalities are from pit bulls. You can't argue with the stats. And if you're operating as a business, I don't care how nice you think your pit bull is or someone's pit bull is, the odds are against you. Okay. So if someone says, "I want to bring my pet," can you say no Rottweilers, no German Shepherds, no pit bulls or other aggressive dogs? Yes, you can. Now, the other issue might be someone who's relying on an American with Disabilities Act thing, and it's a service dog, and that's a different story. But you don't have to take necessarily in a one-bedroom condo their service pony. That's unreasonable. Or their service snake, whatever, some exotic animal. Complaints from the HOA. You may be liable for violations and fines by the HOA due to the activity that your guests do that violate the rules. Now, you're allowed to bill it back to them if you have a good agreement that says that, but just be aware if they violate HOA rules with like things like parking or noise or whatever, you could be liable. Finally, having a good rental agreement is important. Now, while most platforms have user agreements, many short-term rental owners require customers to sign additional agreements. I've used them on both sides. for owners and as a user, and I've seen them, and make sure you have a lawyer review this to make sure, number one, it doesn't violate discrimination laws, short-term rental platform rules it may violate, or contain rules and regulations that are just legally unenforceable. So you got to be careful about that stuff. So summing it up, know the laws, rules, and regs for your business, whatever business that you're in, before you go haywire in it. And I'm not saying you have to learn everything there is to know what I just covered and then some before you even buy your first property. That's not what I'm saying. Just be aware that these things exist. And if you're going to scale this, the more you scale, the more potential risks, right? The more customers, the more potential blowups. The more properties, the more the potential injuries, and so on and so forth. Get good legal counsel familiar with short-term rentals, and particularly the way you conduct your business, because if you get something generic on the internet from a friend you met in a chat group, in an agreement, well, they may do things differently than you, or in a different jurisdiction where that agreement is not applicable. And don't, again, be frightened away from this business. This webinar is intended to get you thinking of the things you don't know that you don't know, so that you can research further and get into compliance. And I think that's about all I had, except I wanted to talk about seeking advice from others on a topic like this. So Proverbs 11:14, Solomon wisely opines, where no counsel is, the people fall, but in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. In other words, don't wing it. It's not a DIY business. You really got to learn it. It's a business. And like any business, the more you learn, the less risk, and the more you earn. That's as simple as that. So we have upcoming, Karen and I are going to be doing a short-term rental training, vacation rental intensive seminar. It is Saturday, December 7th from 8 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. So it's a really serious, intense training. It is going to be at the conference center at Ridgegate, which is in South Denver, for those of you who don't know where that is. For those of you who do know, have been to events there, at the event center there. Now we're limiting that to, it's going to be live streaming too, but the in-person is limited to only 50, and we have only begun to market this, and we've already got a lot of people signed up, so it's going to fill up. So if you want to attend live, I suggest you do it right away. So now it's the 6th and the 7th for certain people. So we have 3 options, and you can go to the link here, wealthbuilders.org, who is co-sponsoring the event along with Karen and I. It's wealthbuilders.org/RE-vacation, RE-vacation. I'll leave that up for a minute so you have that, and maybe someone will pop that in the chat, that link, so everyone can see it. The 7th from 8 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. is the event, okay? You can attend live. You can also attend streaming online if you absolutely can't make it, okay? But we recommend, and it's a very affordable event. And then Friday night, there's a VIP option where you can meet. We do a meet and greet. We do some, prayer things, and we do some strategy sessions, and I think we have some food and drink too. To feed your face. That's included with that. So go to wealthbuilders.org/RE-vacation. Remember, the live event is only limited to 50 people. The streaming, as many server can handle, I think, but you always get a lot more with events live in person because number one, you get to ask questions live, and number two, it's the people you meet. The people you meet, the potential partnerships, joint. It's not even in the classroom you learn at a coffee break in between, or on the Friday night VIP session. You learn someone who's been doing it a while, who's just coming to get more information, that might be able to share information in your local jurisdiction. Okay. All right. And that's
We
all I want to say
lost
about
your
that.
audio,
Karen,
Bill.
can you hear me?
Now we can.
Oh,
You're
now I
back.
can. Okay. For a second there, I got a little message that said internet unstable. That's
Oh,
Comcast for you.
wow, that was so awesome, Bill.
Thank you.
And
And
um,
that's just a a pinch. That's an appetizer of what we're going to be covering at the event. We're going to be covering everything, Karen and I, and Karen is an old pro at short-term vacation rentals. So we're going to be doing from, finding rentals that are appropriate, evaluating whether it makes sense, what areas you should go in and what areas you should stay away from, what are hot areas, what are up and coming, and doing the math and financing them and running them efficiently, using the websites, furnishing them cheaply while you get the maximum dollar effect. And of course, I'm going to cover all the legal, tax, technical, regulatory issues, and how to use creative financing too, which we've talked about before in acquiring these properties to use for short-term rentals.
Yeah, it's really it's going to be really strong and very good. There is a lot to it. We also have a lender that is going to be a part of this, that's going to join us for one of the sessions and maybe Q&A, because navigating through that financing with these, you just kind of want to know what you're doing and connect with people that
Yeah,
know how to do that. Hey,
yeah.
Bill, I don't know if you can do this, but we do have a request for you to put
Okay.
the slide up, the one before the prayer. If you could just show that for a couple
Oh,
seconds, that'd be great. And we've got
let me see
lots
that.
of questions here.
Here. Let's see. Let's see if I can put that one back up. There it is. It was
One,
Proverbs 11:14. That was the New King James Version,
and
where
then the
no
slide
counsel
right
is.
before that.
Was there one right before that?
Yeah, one right there we go. That's great.
Yeah.
All
And
right.
those of you who do attend the event, we're going to have, we're going to record it, obviously, because it is streaming. But I highly recommend you do it live, because even the people online, I think we're going to have during our Q&A sessions, the ability for them to ask questions that we'll present to when Karen and I and this lender and it's very important, by the way, to know how to finance these things. They're not like regular rentals. You have to have a special type of loan program for short-term rentals. So
Yeah,
we're going to
that's so great.
well.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions. People have specifics on their situation, and we can answer as much as we can on a webinar like this, but really that's where we can sit down or take that Q&A in a small group and really get into details.
Okay.
So okay, here we go. I'm just going to run as many of these questions by you as we can today. This first one is from Heather, and this is a great question. I was wondering this too. Do you think Biden's changes of pass-through corporations will be changed back after January 20th? And what do I do if I need to form LLCs now?
Well, first of all, anything that goes into effect in January will be for 2020. So whatever rules are in effect now for 2024, if you're going to buy something or run something in the next 6 weeks, you're under Biden's rules. Okay.
Yeah,
So, and if something gets passed or eliminated, either executive or by Congress next year, they'll probably make it retroactive to January 1st of 2025 if it gets passed later in the year. So the answer is the lawyer answer, which is going to be the lawyer answer for most of these. It depends. It depends really, your total picture, what other income you have, whether you qualify as a real estate professional, whether you materially participate, whether that's going to even matter or not. Because the fact is, look, it's not like a regular rental where you're just above break even and you get losses even with depreciation. You're making money on these. Most Airbnb type short-term vacation rentals, they're not losing money even on paper. After depreciation, you're still making money. So it may not affect you depending on a lot of factors. So that's one you're going to have to run by your tax professional now and, of course, after the new year.
that's awesome. And Fran is wondering, are SDIRAs good for short-term rentals?
They can be. Self-directed IRAs can be if they're set up properly. And I touched on it a little bit by using multiple entities where one rents it to the other, because you can't run a business in an IRA because you get hit with what's called unrelated business income tax. It's UBIT. You don't want to do that because the rate is super high. So if you do it properly, the answer is yes.
Yeah, you helped us put together one where we had to do definitely some finagling to make sure we kept under certain percentages. There's a lot of rules with it, but it is possible. You just want to make
It's
sure that you
workable.
get enough
I'll make a
information.
note of that to cover that topic at the event.
That'd be great. That's a good
Yeah.
one. So Brenda, hi Brenda, good to have you on. She just wondered, she's a little like wanted clarity. So she said, so I don't or I do run my vacation rental through my LLC.
Well, you don't run it through as yourself, for sure. If you have what's called referred to as a single owner or disregarded LLC, it's the same as if you own it in your name for tax reasons. So if you provide a lot of services, and that means is you're not reporting a separate tax return for your LLC, you're reporting on your personal return, the same as if you owned it in your own name. For liability purposes, it's better, but for tax purposes, it's exactly the same, which could be a bad thing if you're providing a lot of services and the IRS audits you and says, that's a business you're running. We're putting it on Schedule C, not Schedule E as rental income. And that could be disastrous.
Okay, that's great. So Yuda has got several questions, and I don't know, Yuda, if we're going to be able to answer all of those. But here I'll get through a couple of them for sure. Yuda says, if my single member LLC owns a short-term rental and my LLC is the property owner and the insured, do I need to list my personal name as an additional insured?
Oh, absolutely, if you're running the property, because you individually can get sued in addition to your LLC, who's the primary insured. So make sure you and anyone else involved in the maintenance of the property is an additional insured. Not the cleaners, but whoever's managing it, dealing with customers and so forth.
Okay, great. And then one more here, too. What amount of liability coverage do you recommend? How would you adjust for having a pool? And at what point do you
Oh
need an
yeah.
umbrella?
Well, you need an umbrella if your insurer doesn't give you enough insurance. So the limit that they may give you for liability with that company may be $500,000, which is inadequate. And then your umbrella would kick in at, a million, $500,000 and $1, 500,000 and $1 up to 2 or 3 million. And that policy is pretty inexpensive, the umbrella. If you already have a million, maybe you only need a million more. But if you had a pool and a single family house, I'd say 3 million if you can get it.
Yep, that's great. And this is a question from Rebecca, and she said, if you rent with Airbnb, don't they collect the taxes and their fees?
I mentioned that earlier. Yes, a lot of the online platforms will collect the lodging tax or sales tax and give them to the authorities. For the most part, they'll do the reporting, but there are outside services. If not, if the website you're using doesn't do the not just a collection of the tax, but you have to give it to the authorities and file the reports, the sales lodging tax returns. So if your online platform you're using doesn't do that, either your accountant could do it, or there are third-party services who do this as a specialty for short-term rentals.
Okay, that's really good. Yeah, I like that because we just get the net and it just helps with budgeting as well, because you
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
get the cash that's yours and
right.
everything else, going a different direction.
Mhm.
Okay, this is a final question here. This is from Brenda, and Brenda, you say, I would love to see my home used more often. You've tried furnished finders, but they are difficult to work with and didn't work out well. And then you also noted that your rental's been breaking even, but it seems like any extra has been used for repairs, that you would love to sell this. So my question, I think we talked about this before, is do you have it listed? Because it's important if you actually want to sell that to get it listed, but then also to work with a real estate agent that knows the numbers. And
Yes,
they actually present a package because it's going to probably go to investors. So you want to be prepared with all your expenses for serious buyers.
right,
And that's really your real estate agent's job to pull that
right.
together.
Well, it depends on how you're presenting it to the public. If you're going to present this as this is a turnkey short-term rental for you as an investor, you're gonna market it one way. If you're saying, hey, this is an owner occupant property, it's and it's all beautiful and furnished, ready to go, unless you want to keep that stuff, then you would market it that way, or you might market it both ways. But if you're going to market it as a short-term rental, make sure your agent is experienced at presenting this.
Yeah. And just on the topic of furnished finders too, they're a little tricky in my experience. So they are supposed to be a site that really is good for like medical people or, those executive rentals. But just talking to some, yeah, we don't do a lot on there either, and it hasn't been a good platform for us compared to Airbnb, for example. However, I did talk to someone that was very successful on it, and he said the key to furnished finders is, in his opinion, this is just his opinion, is to put your home lower than the other homes. And that
Mhm.
seems to be something on furnished finders, that price really drives
Mhm.
where they go to. So if that's helpful or not, you could
Yeah,
try to,
that makes a lot of sense because
yeah.
most people go on vacation. Price is not their only concern. They want nice. They want good
Yes,
service. And when you pick a hotel, you don't pick, Super 8. If you're going with your family, you usually pick something in the middle, like a Marriott or a Sheraton, or something that's a good bargain and has some features and has some services and a pool and maybe some activities. When you're looking like you're traveling like a traveling nurse, you just want a place to crash and you want it clean, nice, located, and cheap.
that's so good. That's really good, Bill. All
Mhm.
right. Well, this has been amazing. Bill, thank you so much. Wow,
My
this
pleasure.
is a terrific webinar. And just want to remind you, if you're in the coaching family, you actually get a discount to come to this event.
Hmm.
But we have priced it very reasonably. And I would just encourage you, as Bill said, if you really want to learn about vacation rentals, this is going to be a very good webinar, or I'm sorry, it's more than a webinar, conference. We actually call it an intensive conference and live
Yes.
stream. And if you come in person, that's going to be your best experience, but we will definitely be taking questions on live stream as well.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
Bill, any final thoughts before we sign off here?
Well, I think the point I made right from the beginning was don't be scared, don't be frightened. Just know what you're doing. Learn the proper way to run the short-term or vacation rental business so that you can make money, have fun, but not have too many headaches or liabilities or tax issues. There's a little more to it than it appears from the eye. That's where we're offering the training so intensive, to really prepare you. This will really prepare you for going out and doing the business of short-term rentals and knowing what the issues that you need to be concerned, that you need to, bone up on and really learn a lot, what you're weak on and where you need help.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks again, Bill. Thanks to our Wealth Builders team, and thanks to all of you that we consider part of the Wealth Builders family. I hope this has been a very helpful webinar for you, and we hope to see you on December 7th. All right. God bless and have a great rest of the day.
Bye-bye.